Pick the wrong ridge and the river will come collect the debt. That's the first rule of the frontier. Every decision has teeth. Out here, choosing ground isn't romance. It's risk management with wolves watching. Start with the 3 non-negotiables: water, timber, and defensible sightlines. You want a creek you can hear but not fear. Close enough for buckets and washing, far enough that a spring flood can't pluck your cabin like a splinter. Gauge the floodplain by the silt on trunks and the drift lines snagged in brush. If last year's river left trash at your ankle, a real storm will put that same line at your chin. Timber comes next. Oak, hickory, or pine, straight trunks, tight grain, no spiral twist, no punky rot. Tap the bark. A dull thud means trouble in the heartwood. Finally, the ground must let your eyes run long, high enough to read the tree line, open enough that nothing pads to your door without 30 yards of warning. The land makes promises it doesn't keep. A meadow can be a bowl for cold air, a fog catcher that breeds fever. That shady bend in the stream can be a mosquito factory with teeth you can't swat. The smartest settlers learn to triangulate. Water for life, timber for walls, and angles for defense. Put your back to a slope and your face to a sweep of grass. If you can't draw a rifle across the approach without a sapling snagging your barrel, you've already lost the first fight. Ask John Chapman, Johnny Appleseed, who wandered the Ohio country with a seed sack and stubborn optimism. He scouted a ridge above a creek and a stand of white oak that looked heaven-built for walls. Too tidy, he thought, and camped to listen. Sometime past midnight, the timber peeled back a scream, panther, so near it felt like breath. Chapman climbed, knife in his teeth, and rode the dark in a fork of branches. At dawn, he didn't abandon the sight. He widened the clearing. He cut himself a ring of visibility. That cabin stood and travelers used its hearth, but folks swore a cat's ghost paced the orchard. Lesson written in claw marks: perfect spots are ambushes in disguise unless you widen the world around them. Not every calculus was practical. Fear loves ceremony. Families would slip a silver coin beneath the chosen patch of earth, a quiet bribe to whatever spirit's own mud and root. Sometimes the coin blackened when they dug it up again, as if the ground had opinions. One kin of Daniel Boone did the burying, ignored the omen, raised his walls, and a flash flood smacked his faith flat that winter. Coincidence, sure. The frontier still counted it. Then there's human math. A good bend in a river is a magnet. Claims overlap, tempers run on whiskey. 2 clans on the Sangamon both wanted the same high bank. Words slipped into blades and blood until a preacher ruled, flip for it or bury each other. They flipped. One family raised a cabin, the other moved on with curses. Years later, when somebody lifted floorboards for repair, a human skeleton turned up in the dirt, older than the cabin likely, but nobody cared about carbon dates. The story did what stories do. It turned land into a rumor that walked at night. The quiet veto often sat with the woman who would keep the house breathing. A valley is cozy until it stinks of still water and fever. A hilltop is trouble until it gifts wind that bats mosquitoes off your skin. Sarah Lincoln, stepmother to a boy named Abraham, picked breezes over beauty, and her family slept through a wave of sickness that chewed the low ground. Put that in your ledger. Intuition is just experience that refuses to brag. Some people let sticks decide. Dowsers took forked branches, felt for invisible tug, and claimed the wood pointed to water, and sometimes to safe ground. Science shrugs. The frontier nods when a spring bubbles where the twig leaned. One preacher swore his rod found spirit quiet land as well as wells. When a tornado took the neighbors and skipped his cabin, the debate died like a snuffed candle. Belief has a way of winning arguments it shouldn't. Before you lay an axe to bark, test the ground's behavior. Walk it after rain. Look for where deer trail fades into muck, where reeds thicken, where last flood's leaves plaster the fence line. Scratch the soil with a heel. Loam sweet with rot will grow your corn, but if your footprint fills with water, you're courting mold in the walls and cough in the bones. Trees tell truth, lichen up to your waist. Damp, saplings dying in rings? Late frosts pool here. Lightning split trunks count thunder the way rings count years. Cluster of them atop a knob says, the sky has your address. Sightlines are not a luxury. Clear 100 paces in all directions. That's not aesthetic. That's artillery. In a world where news travels by hoof, you need to see trouble when it's still a rumor. A narrow hollow funnels sound toward you, in a way that fools the ear and hides feet until they're beating your threshold. A hill with a crown of low grass gives you seconds you can spend on choosing words or loading powder. Do not fall in love with the stream's curve. Rivers are friendly until the thaw unlocks the mountains, and water remembers it was a blade before it was a mirror. The best cabins sit just above the river's tantrum line, high enough that driftwood piles look like distant history, close enough to carry 2 buckets without trading a shoulder for it. Folks counted steps to water the way misers fingered coins. 50 easy paces was wealth, 200 uphill was a winter sentence. Neighbors are insurance policies you pay with sweat. Pick a site within a morning's shout of another chimney if you can. Too close and you share arguments. Too far and you share gravestones. House raisings aren't parties. They're treaties. When you show up with rope and back, you're banking hours for the day you'll need 10 men and a prayer. That calculus begins with where you drop your first log. The soil keeps its own superstitions. Some swore that if the first sap from the first cut bled red, your year would bleed too. Others carved a cross into the stump before felling, or burned a twig from the first tree as a cleansing. You don't have to believe, but you should notice what belief does. It slows men down long enough to double-check the wind and the lean. Fear wrapped in ritual is just a safety meeting that can't read. Then there's the whisper nobody likes to put in words. This was someone else's country first. You clear a space and the woods watch. Some families mark their corners with tokens, feathers, stones, tobacco, as if asking permission. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes arrows hummed out of the tree line, and the half-built walls became cover, not shelter. A single feather tucked in a roof might mean we see you. The message is not always a threat. It is always a reminder. Remember that comfort is a trap. Valleys cradle and deceive. Sun-warmed flats feed your wheat and flood your floor. Ridge spines shrug off water, but invite wind to pry at shingles. Read the sky's habits. If it builds anvils over the western trees every afternoon, your roof pitch and rafter ties are no longer craft. They're armor. If winter drops like a hammer, your site must bank earth and drink light. The frontier punishes perfect. The just right spot is usually the one all the wrong forces want. Water wants it in April, frost wants it in October. Men with claims want it in June. The place you choose should be the place that gives ground only grudgingly, less pretty, more stubborn. The creek half distant, the timber a short drag, the hill modest enough that your legs aren't spent by noon, the wind steady enough to keep sickness thin. So you walk, and you listen. For frogs in the evening and skeins of silt at the roots, for the hush that means predator, and the rush that means spillway. You test the soil and taste the air. You mark where the sun crawls at winter noon, because that low arc decides whether your door squints at light or glares at shadow. You pick the spot that offends your eye a little and pleases your gut a lot. Then you stake it, a peg at each corner, a prayer under one, maybe a coin, maybe just a promise to work until your hands forget softness. The decision will be judged a dozen ways you don't control, by weather, by neighbors, by memory, but you've given yourself odds. The chessboard is set, the timber is waiting, and the forest, patient as gravity, has begun to measure you back. Land picked? Good. The next contract you sign will be with the axe, and the axe always demands proof. Community doesn't arrive. It is built from hours you don't have. A barn raising is insurance you issue from your own back. You show up with rope and a good temper, and what you get is 10 men on your rafters when storm season moves in crooked. You lend a saw and return 2 tools sharpened, because gratitude on the frontier is loud and practical. Feuds happen, over springs that run low, over pigs that run free, over lines drawn from trees that were saplings when you were born in another state. A preacher mediates, or a coin does, or a hard winter replaces pride with arithmetic. We can't afford to be enemies while the river plans a flood. Trade with native bands is tension braided with usefulness. Deer hides for iron, birch bark for knives, mica for glass you can't afford. You keep your rifle near to honor fear, and your hands open to honor need. A feather left in a lintel can be peace or a warning. You don't guess which, you behave as if it's both. Wisdom moves both ways. 3 sisters planting. Bark canoes that teach buoyancy better than anything you dreamed up. Birch bark boxes that keep flour honest. These are lessons that outlast treaties. You pay fairly or you pay later. Children carry messages along deer paths faster than news. Water between cabins when wells run stubborn. Gossip that becomes rescue when someone fails to answer smoke at dawn. Women stitch communities tight, nursing borrowed babies while a fever walks a cabin. laying out dead with dignity when a storm wins, organizing stores for a widow whose loft collapsed. Men with long memories teach boys how to travel quiet, and girls how to dress a wound without waiting for a man to find his courage. Everyone learns to listen when the woods go silent, and to move when a dog stares at a line in the trees as if it owes him money. Fort cabins rise when rivers swell, and men with masks take from smokehouses. 10 families under one roof learn how loud night is and how quickly a rumor becomes a prayer. You sleep in shifts, you settle quarrels before they grow antlers, and you hang lanterns in windows like stars for anyone still stumbling home. When waters fall, the fort becomes a story you don't brag about because someone didn't come back, and grief on the frontier is folded into work until it becomes muscle memory. By harvest, a good year lays itself in neat rows, corn tight in cribs, beans dried, squash hung, meat smoked, salt barrels sealed, tools greased, roofs patched, fences mended, grudges cooled, hands blistered less than last year because you learned where to place the weight. A bad year still gives you this: neighbors who show up when you whistle, skills that didn't exist last spring, a cabin that holds, and a map in your head of every weakness it still whispers. The Frontier's curriculum is pass-fail, and the exam never ends. You survive by adding small advantages until the ledger tilts your way. In the end, a cabin is proof of argument. You argued with weather, wolves, hunger, distance, and doubt, mostly your own. The walls don't celebrate. They hold. The hearth doesn't cheer. It draws. The door doesn't boast. It bars. What carries you is the sum of right-sized choices. Pick ground that offends your eye but pleases your gut. Sharpen before you swing. Seal before you boast. Store before you feast. Help before you ask. Do that. And when the wind leans on your ridge at midnight, your house answers without words. If the frontier taught anything, it's this: grit is a story only when it becomes a system. Tell me which trick you'd steal for your own life: the coin under the corner, the hair in the chinking, the feather in the lintel, or the simple rule you'll never ignore again. A log cabin is never just wood and sweat. It's a ledger written in muscle, risk, and memory. Every notch and joint is an argument against weather. Every floorboard is a refusal of mud. Every roof pitch is a bet placed against the sky. When you step back from the smoke-stained walls and hear the doorbar settle into its slot, what you've built is not a house but a system, a machine for surviving wilderness, a ritual for keeping death at arm's length. The lessons don't retire with the frontier. They scale into any age. Sharpen before you swing, mend before you boast, store before you feast. A house stands because its keeper tends it daily, not because its logs were square once. Strength is maintenance, not miracle. Neighbors are insurance more than sentiment. Superstition is memory disguised as charm, and rituals are just checklists spoken aloud. Look close and you see the cabin wasn't only about shelter. It was about belonging. Each family carved itself into the land one groove at a time, by sweat, by scars, by the stories whispered into cracks with clay and hair. The cabin outlasted many who built them, but what endured more was the method. Discipline carried like a lantern, shared until it became culture. In the end, the log walls didn't tame the frontier. They tamed the people inside, taught them humility before weather, patience with tools, respect for flame, trust in one another. That is the frontier's final trick. You set out to build a home, and the home builds you back. So when wind rises against your own walls, whatever they're made of, steel, glass, or rough pine, remember the cadence of those who went before. Keep edges sharp, keep seams sealed, keep neighbors close, and know that survival has always been less about walls than about the hands willing to tend them. Every swing is a contract with gravity, and gravity never misses a payment. You don't just cut trees on the frontier, you negotiate with them, and they're terrible listeners. Your kit starts with 2 pieces of iron that decide whether you get walls or a funeral, a felling axe and a broad axe. The felling axe is narrow bit, hungry and fast. It opens the tree and sets direction. The broad axe is the sculptor, wide bit, heavy and honest. It turns round into flat and chatter into fit. If the felling axe is your signature, the broad axe is the notary that makes the promise real. Before steel touches bark, you read the tree like a psalm. Is the trunk plumb, or does it carry a quiet lean? Are the branches heavier on one side? Where does the wind shove from? And what does the ground offer when 1,000 pounds of hardwood decides to lie down? You pick your drop zone, Clear escape lanes at 45 degrees behind you, and rehearse the step you'll take when the trunk cracks like thunder. Anyone who doesn't practice the run earns a nickname no one says to their face. Start the face cut on the side you want the tree to fall, an open notch, mouth toward the landing. Too shallow and the hinge will snap ugly. Too deep and you waste wood and control. Then you walk around to the back and set the back cut just above the notch's throat. People rush here. Don't. Wedge early and wedge often. A pine that coughs and hangs because you were stingy with wedges will suck half your day and all your patience. Never chase a barber chair. When a trunk splits up the middle and kicks back, it turns your careful plan into a catapult for your skull. James Robertson understood the language. He felt a wrong lean in a fat oak and called scatter. The men rolled out and the tree missed him by inches. That story travels because it ends with breath. Many don't. The ones that do end with breath become training. Read the crown, hear the fibers, trust the wedge. You learn to love the small things. How a sharp bit sings and a dull one thuds. How sap smell changes when you're about to hit a rot pocket. How a squirrel exploding from a hollow is both comedy and indictment of your pre-fall inspection. There's ritual in iron. Some men blood a new axe, nicking a finger to feed it, binding tool to hand with a drop of red. It's bravado disguised as ceremony. What actually binds you is callous and habit. You oil the head every evening, keep the bit capped and never leave steel sunk in wood overnight where damp can creep into the eye and loosen the haft. Hickory handles are living bones, grain straight, growth rings tight, hung with a proud swell at the knob so your hand finds home when sweat turns to stream. Felling is only the first stanza. Bucking is where your back pays. Limbs come off first, branch by branch from the underside when they're under tension, so the cut doesn't trap your bit. Then you section the trunk. You plan your cuts to spare wedges and save leverage, rolling the log with cant hooks or poles rather than wrestling it like a fool. A buried bit is embarrassment and hazard. When gnarl and twist crowd your line, you rotate and attack from the other side. Pride doesn't keep you warm. Cunning does. Now the broad axe has its day. You snap chalk lines, real chalk if you have it, sew it in a string if you don't, and score along them with a felling axe, shallow curves every few inches. Then comes the hew, stand above the log on staging, toes turned, wide stance and peel the waist with heavy, honest swings. A broad axe demands a conversation with your feet. If they drift, your cut drifts. If they're square, your face comes off like curls from a plane. Fresh hewers try to rush. The forest finds them in shins and toes. Veterans pace themselves and stop to listen. Iron tells truth when you let it. Hewing has a rhythm that tempts the reckless. That's when the woods interrupt, always with timing like a joke. A branch cracks. A bear stirs where you swore there was only wind. You stop mid-swing, eye the tree line and decide whether you're still alone. Danger doesn't announce itself. It tests whether you'd rather believe you're safe. Most days pass without teeth. Enough don't to keep your hands a little tight on the haft. People forget how much of the frontier was social physics. A full cabin doesn't rise on solo pride. You call neighbors for a felling day because extra backs make safer cuts and faster moves. But more hands means more variables. A shout misheard, a wedge set late, a rope slack when it should be singing. When a log pinned a young man's leg at a raising, axes became crowbars, hafts became levers, and every ounce of whiskey turned to prayer as they pried timber off bone. The boy lived. The story lived louder. From then on they placed skids, not hope. Under the next big roll, axes aren't saints. They're also messages. In a dispute over a hog that wandered and then didn't wander back, one neighbor buried his axe an inch deep in another's doorframe. Not the door, never the door. You mar the frame and you tell a man he's not safe at home unless he makes it so. That cold conversation saves lives and starts feuds in equal measure. Iron in wood speaks a dialect everyone understands. Women wielded steel with the same shortage of options as men. Hannah Boone, widow, no relation to the famous Daniel, felled enough timber alone to raise a second life from the ashes of the first. Smaller hatchets carved pegs, made kindling, split rails when wrist said stop and will said no. No one called it heroism. They called it Tuesday. On the frontier, roles blur when the weather says work or starve. There's etiquette to felling that keeps friends. You don't drop into someone else's clearing without their eye on your hinge. You don't borrow a sharp axe and return it dull. You never ever fell downhill toward a man's cabin because you're sure it'll tuck left. Trees love the left you didn't plan for. They also love ropes if a crew sets them right. Hair team on a line can pull a stubborn lean into obedience, but a lazy hand on a rope becomes a whip when the top goes and the butt kicks. You brief before you bind. You clear before you cut. The forest holds more than wood. Sometimes the stump ring exposes what the map kept quiet. Bones where no bones should be. You stop, you call others. You handle it with a tobacco offering if that's the language in your valley, with prayer if that's yours, with care either way. Some walk, some rebury and build. Most learn the same lesson. The ground remembers longer than people do. Put that memory in your math. Sharpening is half your day you didn't budget for. A dull bit is louder, slower and meaner. 10 minutes on the stone buys you an hour of clean work and the skin on your knuckles. Carry a file. Dress the edge when it glints wrong in the light. If the profile is rolled, you don't fix that with wishful thinking. You reset the bevel and promise yourself not to twist at the end of your swing like a show-off. Put a sheath on the head whenever you set it down. Fair steel on dirt is a marriage you don't want, and mind the haft. The grain should run with the curve. Cross grain is betrayal waiting to happen. You set the head with a dry wedge and swell it with oil so the eye locks like a fist. If the head creeps, you fix it now, not after this cut. Loose steel flies true, at your friend's knee or your own. Superstition shadows all this. Men talk to trees before they cut them. They tap a trunk like they're at a neighbor's door. They burn a twig from the first felling in the cook fire to introduce themselves to the work. Laugh if you want. Those few seconds of ritual often hide a last safety check. The glance at wind, the second wedge taken from a pocket, the eye line with the rope team. Folklore as procedure saves fools from themselves. You'll learn to spot wind eddies by how leafbacks flash silver. You'll learn to smell rain half an hour before it crosses the ridge, and to beat it by 3 cuts and a sprint with the cant hook. You'll learn which trees hold widowmakers. Dead limbs balanced overhead that drop when the first tooth bites. You'll knock them down with a throw line or walk away, no shame in it. Courage isn't standing under a hung limb. Courage is saying not today to a story that needs a funeral to be interesting. The day ends with stacks, straight logs sorted by length, barked and rolled onto skids so air moves and rot doesn't. You police the stumps for wedges. Pick up every offcut that could twist an ankle tomorrow, and hang axes inside where damp can't reach. You rub your hands with tallow or pine pitch and name each blister like an old friend you hope won't visit again. You came to the forest for materials. It invited you to an exam. If you're still standing at dusk with all your fingers, you passed. But the forest keeps office hours 7 days a week. Tomorrow you'll hew faces and square corners. That's when precision stops being pride and starts being warmth. Because a jag in your cut is a winter draft with your name on it. If your cut drifts, winter walks right through the wall. Dropping trees is one war, but turning round trunks into tight-fitting logs is another. And it's fought with patience, rhythm, and the broad axe. The broad axe is a beast, a flat-edged, wide blade hung offset so your knuckles skim bark while the edge bites. You don't swing it like a felling axe. You guide it like a blade that weighs more than sense. Miss your line and you don't just ruin the log, you open a door for drafts that steal heat and life in February. The process begins with scoring. You strike shallow notches along the log's length with your felling axe, every foot or so, guidelines that give the broad axe somewhere to break. Then you hew. Stand steady on a platform, 1 foot forward, the other braced, and work the logs face down until the cuts meet the line. Hewing is choreography. Step, swing, reset. Get sloppy and you don't just scar the wood, you bleed shins. Veterans kept rhythm like hymns. Greenhorns limped. Thomas Lincoln, Abraham's father, learned that rhythm could be broken by more than dull iron. Mid-swing one morning, he froze at a crash in the underbrush. What his gut told him was a bear turned out to be a deer bursting past, but the moment stuck. On the frontier, precision is fragile. The forest insists on interrupting your best work. First lesson, bark comes off before you hew. Leave it, and you invite insects to dig channels and rot to bloom. One Ohio family ignored the rule. By spring, ants had nested in their cabin walls. When a storm drove smoke back down the chimney, the ants boiled out with the heat. The family abandoned their half-built home, choking on insects, and slept under the wagon until they started fresh, this time with debarked logs. Notching is next, the corners that turn a pile of sticks into a skeleton of a home. The saddle notch is fast, simple, and forgiving. The square notch is stronger but demands perfect flatness. The Appalachian dovetail locks tighter than a miser's fist, but if your angles stray, you might as well build with spaghetti. Choice wasn't fashion, it was math, time versus lifespan. Some built cabins to last a season. Others built tombstones they intended to sleep under. Corners carried more than weight. Families carved initials or crosses into the first joint, talismans against bad luck. A log house without a mark was naked to rumor. One man in Kentucky carved not a cross but a snake, daring misfortune. A lightning strike burned his roof the next year. Was it chance? Maybe. But the story spread and no one copied him again. Raising walls was never a solo act. Neighbors arrived with rope, shoulders, and whiskey. Logs lifted by hand, tilted into place and pinned with pegs. Spirits lifted too, until somebody's pride tangled with someone else's rope. In one notorious raising, Silas McCain marked another man's pace. Words caught fire, fists flew, and the log they were balancing came down hard, nearly crushing two boys. The fight ended, but the scar in the yard stayed. A reminder that cooperation on the frontier was less about friendship and more about survival contracts. Not all muscle belonged to men. Eliza Bryan, young mother, survived the New Madrid earthquakes of 1811. With the ground still twitching and her baby crying, she steadied a log with her draw knife, while her husband braced the corner. She left a record. The earth groaned, but the house must stand. Women's hands turned as many raw trunks into square beams as men's. Often in the quiet hours no one wrote down, walls still leaked unless sealed. Chinking, filling gaps with clay, straw, ash, even dung, turned drafts into insulation. Some families slipped charms into the seams, coins, feathers, carved wood slivers. One woman mixed a lock of her dead child's hair into the mud as a binder, a ritual of grief. Months later, a tornado tore roofs from neighbors' homes but left her cabin untouched. Folks whispered about the hair holding the walls together. Maybe superstition, maybe early lessons in fiber reinforcement. Either way, no one mocked her choice. The corners stood. The seams were filled. But 4 walls without a roof are just a pen for the wind. Precision had given you a box that kept its shape. Warmth still needed a lid. And the sky wasn't patient. The sky doesn't leak, it hunts. Out here a roof isn't decoration. It's the thin argument you make against weather with a talent for murder. You begin with bones. Rafters that won't twist when the wind pulls like a thief on payday. Green poles, pine or cedar if you can get them. Resist splitting as they dry in place. You notch birds' mouths with an adze, seating each rafter on the wall log, so load travels down the corners and not through dreams. Test fit, then test again. A rafter that rocks while you're standing on it will rock you into the dirt the first time a gust blows from the wrong quarter. Frame smart, not heroic. Tie opposing rafters with a collar if you're short on ridge stock, or run a ridgepole if you've got the timber. Just remember, heavy saves lives until heavy breaks backs. Lash temporary braces before you climb, and keep a rope on every piece you can't afford to chase. People die trying to catch falling wood. Let gravity finish its tantrum, then reset like a mason with time to spare. Material is your next argument. If the woods are kind, you split shingles, shakes from straight-grained oak or cedar. The tool is a froe, an ell of iron you drive with a mallet, riding the grain instead of fighting it. You learn to read growth rings the way a miller reads flour. Tight rings split sweet. Wide wandering rings make junk. Stack the good wedges, toss the liars, and don't fall in love with a bad billet. Bad wood is debt with interest. Lay shingles in courses like scales on a fish. Thick edge down, thin edge under, 3 layers deep at minimum where the sky hits hardest. Stagger seams, so water has to change its mind 3 times before it thinks of entering. Nail if you have iron, peg if you don't. Either way, keep fasteners proud of the thin ends, so they don't split the shingle when winter swells turn iron into wedges. People think roofs fail from above. Most die from below, steam and smoke and warm air sneaking into the attic, condensing under cold boards feeding rot. Vent a whisper at the eaves and a sip at the ridge. Let the house breathe like a lung. Storm timing is a teacher with a paddle. Ezra Carter learned on a day when thunder walked in on a schedule the sky didn't share. He set his last rafter, as wind shouldered the walls and a loose pole dropped from a grip gone slick. Family ducked, prayer caught in throats and the pole thudded dirt instead of skull. Moral stored under the skin, hands fail, ropes forgive. Tie off or carry the guilt you could have avoided. Where timber thins into horizon, the prairie offers a poor man's roof, sod. You cut it with a spade into bricks, thick, heavy, alive with root and insect, then lay it over poles like a green quilt. Sod is honest. It insulates like a buffalo hide and leaks like a drunk promise until you learn its manners. Angle your pitch steeper than you want. Layer turf grass side down and cap with a sacrificial coat of clay that you patch after every tantrum the sky throws. Expect life overhead. Mice setting up a parliament, weeds turning your house into a hill. A widow named Clara did what widows do. Cut, hauled, stacked and stitched the earth over her rafters, while a rattlesnake taught her what reflex means. Spring rewarded her with wildflowers blooming above the chimney, beauty no one asked for that still made hard mornings easier. Sealing is temper, not talent. Clay and ash make a decent mortar under shakes. Pine pitch or tar turns leaks into grudges that last. But every fix breeds a pest. Fat in a mix keeps water out, and raccoons in. One Missouri father didn't sleep a week, club in hand guarding a roof that smelled like supper. He learned what Clay already knew. Roof pitch is math with a cost. Too flat, snow piles like a siege and breaks your truss work. Too steep, wind fingers under the edge and peels you like an orange. The frontier settled near 45 degrees because it wastes the least arguing. Don't trust numbers alone. Trust the wind you live with. On Lake Huron, a trapper named Amos set perfect pitch by anyone's chart, then watched a winter gale snatch half his shingles. He tied a rope around his waist, climbed into the wolf's mouth and nailed in the teeth of it, while his wife belayed him with steadfast hands. He came down soaked alive and short a beard where ice had grazed it clean. The roof held. Sometimes the math is right, and the weather still asks for blood. Underlayment is where neighbor knowledge saves roofs. Birch bark, if you can trade for it or peel it clean, lays like leather and sheds water like a fish. Lay sheets under the shingle courses at the eaves and valleys. You'll double your forgiveness. Some learned that trick from those who were here first and paid in knives, tobacco, and humility. The bark is light, silent, stubborn. Everything you want in something between you and the storm. Superstition hitchhikes on practicality. Folks tap salt over the first course to sour lightning. Others carve a tiny cross in the initial shingle. Gesture or quality control. Either way, a ritual slows your hands long enough to notice a crooked run or a bad nail. Out here, ceremony is just a checklist with better stories. Work posture is survival. One man on the nail, one on the feed, one on the line. Ladders tied, not leaned. If someone drinks, they drink after the ridge is capped, not before. The frontier has a long cemetery of men who thought they climbed better with a swallow. The man who hung by his belt and lived became a warning bell rung at every raising. Walk down the ladder sober, or don't climb at all. Children earn roofs too. They pass up shingles, fetch pegs, and pack moss into tiny sins you missed along the eaves. A boy in Ohio stuffed so much moss the roof sagged, and his father said words the Bible doesn't print. But that same boy spotted a hairline crack in a rafter seat that would have turned a blizzard into demolition. You don't know which lesson saves you, so you teach all of them. Lightning is a critic you can't please. You can drive a grounded iron rod if you've got the metal and the time, or you can roll the dice and hang a horseshoe you swear works. Better to keep your chimney clean of creosote, your roofline trimmed of overhanging limbs, and your stovepipe braced. Fire starts in corners and mines. The corners where spark meets dry fiber. The mines that say, I'll get to it after harvest. A man once roasted coffee beans in a skillet and learned what sparks do with dry bark dust. His neighbors remembered the smell the rest of their lives. Set your last course like you mean to live under it. Cap the ridge with overlapping shingles, dressed snug to wind and rain. If you have metal, a strip over the peak turns 3 seasons' worth of leaks into 1 season's worth of repairs. If you don't, you pack patience under your hat and check the roof after every big mood the sky throws. A roof you inspect is a roof that forgives. When the hammering stops and the ladder thunks dirt, stand back and read your work like it's a stranger's. Are the lines straight? Do the eaves throw shadow evenly? Does water rush off the way a horse takes a downhill? Decisive? Walk the inside at night while rain talks. Follow drips with your ear. Mark them. Fix them in the morning. The roof doesn't owe you gratitude because you built it. It owes you exactly what you paid for in attention. Now the cabin can hold a fire without the heavens intervening. But a house with a roof is still a hollow shell until it learns to keep heat like a secret and hold footsteps like a promise. That means a floor that doesn't turn to mud and a hearth that draws smoke up, not lungs out. The sky has been answered. A cabin without a floor is a barn for vermin. and a cabin without a hearth is a coffin that waits politely for winter. Dirt floors are fast but cruel. They hold damp, feed fleas, and swallow food as if the ground itself were hungry. Still, many settlers tamped earth flat, scattered straw and called it done until snakes or ants made the decision for them. Others split logs into puncheons, halved and flattened with an adze, laid tight and pegged into beams. It's hard, backbreaking work, but once you hear the sound of footsteps instead of mud sucking at your boots, you know you've bought real shelter. Night stories carry warnings. The Harland family bedded down on bare dirt their first summer, until a rattlesnake curled from the soil and slid across their pallet. They fled to the wagon for the night, and the next day they laid puncheons till their shoulders screamed. Wood takes pain up front. Dirt takes it later. Everyone learned the same lesson eventually. Floors weren't just practical, they carried signs. First plank circles, carved crosses, burned symbols of protection cut into hidden corners. Families marked their homes the way sailors carved initials into masts, convinced wood could carry loyalty like a charm. One Kentucky farmer carved runes into his first plank, shrugged when neighbors teased him, and thanked his superstition when lightning struck the chimney but spared the house. Underfoot, enemies hid. Ant colonies tunneled beneath beams until one Illinois family woke to find their floor heaving with insects. They smoked the ground with cedar boughs until the house smelled like a funeral, then laid new puncheons. The rule spread by rumor: check the ground before you trust it. The hearth was more than warmth. It was the household's clock and compass. Built of stone if you had it, mud and stick if you didn't, it had to draw smoke without choking the family. Too wide a throat and heat fled like a thief. Too narrow and you drowned in soot. Limestone chimneys cracked with frost, sod chimneys smoldered till they burned, and every choice carried risk. When the New Madrid quake rattled Missouri, a settler's chimney dropped one stone. He lived through the aftershocks, but every night after he ran a hand over that gap as if stone could lie. The first fire was a ceremony. Flame meant victory, but sparks meant death. One Indiana family's rag torch dropped into kindling, and the blaze jumped logs faster than water could stop it. They smothered it with blankets, lungs scorched, and lived with the stink of smoke in their clothes until spring. Fire demanded respect. It still does. Cooking was survival more than comfort. Cast-iron pots swung from cranes. Stews boiled till roots softened, and sometimes poison slipped through. Mistaken roots laid boys in fevers, and one lad bled and lived. His mother's note in a diary that reads like both relief and horror. The hearth fed you, but it also tested whether you knew what you put in its mouth. Smoke was more than waste, it was a signal. In winter storms, neighbors looked for chimney smoke as proof a family was alive. It was a beacon for rescuers, but also a lure for outlaws. Wood choice became language. Hickory meant strength, cedar meant peace, and some claimed maple smoke carried omens. The frontier gave poetry even to exhaust. A good floor keeps you above what crawls, and a good hearth keeps you above what freezes. Together, they give the cabin a heart that beats hot and steady. But fire that warms needs a guard. Walls hold, roofs shed, floors steady. But without a door to close and a shutter to bar, you've only built a box the night can walk into. One weak hinge and the wilderness walks in. A cabin's walls can be stout, its roof pitched to laugh at storms, but without a door that holds and windows that guard, you're just camping inside a wooden sieve. Their frontier door was less furniture than barricade. Wide planks, pegged edge to edge, braced with cross timbers, swung on leather if iron was scarce. Iron hinges cost dear. Cowhide strips boiled, stretched and nailed would hold for years if kept greased. Their door was the line between your family and the teeth scratching outside. Settlers learned fast how little stood between them and hunger on four legs. Elijah Stone hammered his first doorframe with wolves howling close, his blanket jammed in the gap until the pegs were set. He worked by lamplight, back braced against the boards, listening to claws rake wood. When morning came, the marks were deep, but his door still hung. On the frontier, finished meant survived the night. Superstition took its place in every threshold. Horseshoes nailed above were said to catch luck. Some swore the curve trapped evil. One man hung his shoe the wrong way, open ends down. Neighbors claimed that's why a bear shouldered through and clawed his planks. Others said the truth was simpler. Oak too thin, nails too short. Either way, no one built with less than 4 inches of hardwood after that. Windows were another argument with scarcity. Glass was a rumor hauled at great expense. so settlers filled holes with greased paper that let in a smear of light but little view. Shutters were thick, barred, and often smaller than a man's head, just enough to look out with a rifle. Some families stretched rawhide across frames, tough as drumskin, translucent enough to keep a cabin from being a cave. Light was luxury. Security was law. Moisture taught hard lessons, too. The Gray family framed their only window with fresh-cut timber. When dawn dew swelled the wood, the shutter warped and stuck. They missed a week of fresh air, the house choking with smoke until they learned to season their frames. Patience on the frontier wasn't virtue. It was survival currency, ritual-shadowed craft. At sunrise, some families opened shutters wide, blessing the day with light. Skeptics called it habit. Believers swore cabins built without the right soured their soil. One farmer ignored it and planted corn that never tasseled. Belief has teeth when it comes wrapped in bad harvest. Innovation came from need and trade. Fish oil painted on paper panes made them glow like amber lanterns, though raccoons learned quick to chew their way inside for the scent. Some cabins fit mica sheets into frames, flaked stone traded from miles off, brittle but bright. Others stitched deer hide thin and translucent, a membrane that let in glow while muting wind. Each solution was half measure, but every half measure was a kind of victory. People left marks too. One door bore an arrowhead hammered deep, talisman to ward off more arrows. Another had initials carved where a thief once tried to pry through. These scars weren't decoration. They were reminders the threshold was always contested. Her cabin didn't just keep weather out. It kept score. By the time the door swung and the shutter latched, a cabin finally stood as a true refuge. Yet bare walls don't keep a family alive. A house is more than defense. It must store, seat, and support the people who bend their backs to keep it standing. Beds are the first argument you make against exhaustion. On the frontier, you don't sleep somewhere. You sleep on something that won't collapse when a blizzard leans on the walls. Start with a frame. Split rails or smoothed poles mortised into posts, rope laced tight into a lattice that groans like a ship's rigging. Lay a tick stuffed with straw, corn husks, moss, or feathers, if luck hunted with you. Ropes stretch. That's their nature. Sleep tight isn't poetry. It's a nightly chore. Tighten the lacing or wake with your spine shaped like a question mark. The Hayes couple learned the lesson with laughter and panic, the night their rawhide gave way, and dumped a 7-month pregnant wife to the floor. He retied. She laughed through tears. The bed held after that. Pain first, comfort later. That's the currency of furniture here. People salted mattresses with cedar shavings and lavender when they could find it, not because the frontier cared for perfume, but because scent told pests to make their livelihood elsewhere. Call it superstition if you like. The result is the same. Fewer bites, better sleep, steadier hands on the axe next morning. Lift the bed high. It's not a throne, it's storage. Blankets, traps, a rifle, but lift it high enough and heat under the frame lures snakes. One Missouri trapper reached for a bundle of furs and pulled a coiled rattler into the light. He cut true and slept skittish for weeks. The new rule spread. Pitchforks test the dark before the hands do. Children's pallets belong near the hearth where warmth pools low. That's where a boy in Ohio learned the difference between comfort and care when his hair crisped like straw after he rolled too close to the fire. His mother doused, scolded, and drafted him into kindling duty for a month. Frontier lessons are quick and carbonized. Even so, the hearthside pallet is where sickness recovers and babies quiet to the rhythm of wood popping. It's where stories find their first listeners. Tables aren't for ceremony. They're for survival geometry. A flat plane that keeps food off dirt, stitches off knees, and maps unrolled from the mouths of curious toddlers. You build with what the wind already knocked down if you can. Storm-felled walnut or a straight-grained poplar, planed with an adze until it stops snagging sleeves. Legs peg in, no glue wasted, no wobble tolerated. Martha Cole's table still bore the gouge from the night a bear swiped at meat, drying on a rack outside, and her panicked arms slammed the half-carved board into the wall. She finished it jagged, a scar she refused to sand out. Her table should remember, she said. Memory is function when it changes behavior. Knives stay sheathed near windows. Children learn to move away when shadows pass. Under the tabletop lives insurance. A hidden compartment under a sliding panel, just deep enough for a folded deed, a marriage paper, a few coins. Henry Wells forgot his own hidey hole when fever ate his memory. Ellen found it years later, while cleaning for a tenant who smiled too long at their fields. She saved the claim with the slip of paper she pulled from dust. Furniture guards wealth not because it's clever, but because the frontier steals time, attention, and sometimes the roof. Wood that hides the critical thing buys you one more season. Shelves multiply square inches into square dignity. Pegs hammered into wall logs sprout a forest of hanging solutions: tools, coats, seed sacks, lanterns. Boards float on rawhide slings, or sit on brackets sawn from knot-free offcuts. Driftwood makes fine shelves if you scrape river spit from it and let the sun bake out whatever tried to live there. Caleb Turner patched a sod-roof drip that warped his driftwood planks by climbing onto the slick green and nearly tumbling into the yard. His wife grabbed his wrist. He added a second row of pegs after that. Weight off the shelves, risk off their lives. The lesson is dull and necessary. Storage should be lighter than the storm you're about to meet. Lofts carry winter on their backs. 2 beams, a platform of poles, and you've built a second stomach for the house. Dry corn, smoked meat, spare ticks. A Tennessee family learned the arithmetic of weight the day their venison hoard brought the loft down like a snare on their table. No one died. They ate better than they planned for a week, then worse than they hoped for a month. After that, they added braces and a habit: count before you hang. Frontier engineering. Weigh with eyes you can trust, not with pride that lies. Containers are the small miracles. Birch bark boxes sewn with roots, light and watertight. Willow baskets with a weave tight enough to keep flour honest. Gourds hollowed and dried into rattling little vaults. A gourd dangling from a rafter keeps mice guessing. Some swear spirits too. Maybe, or maybe mice just don't like bouncing while they steal. Either way, the grain stays where you left it. Trade brings mica-lidded tins to those with surplus pelts. But most guardians are wood and cleverness. And if you're lucky enough to trade for a woven mat dyed with berry juice, you'll learn it softens the stomp of boots and lures mice with scent until you hang it on the wall as a story instead of under your feet as a rug. Light is rationed like sugar. Tallow candles gutter and smoke. Grease lamps spit and stink. Every spark negotiates with the rafters overhead. So you make holders from antler or bent scrap iron, position them away from curtains and dreams, and train children to respect a flame like a loaded rifle. Some families braid horsehair into wick strings when cotton is too dear. Others pour beeswax when summer is generous to hives. Each flame is a choice, see or save. Most nights you choose both badly, and then learn to choose better. Hooks and rails turn walls into hands. A row of pegs by the door becomes a weather dam. Wet cloaks off, snow shaken before it meets the floor. A rack beside the hearth becomes triage for tools. Wet metal there, dry wood here, the rest out of reach of the toddler who believes everything heavy is a friend. The best cabins feel like a practiced gesture. You can find a cup in the dark, a knife without looking, a blanket without hope. Beauty sneaks in anyway, because even siege engines need banners. Women weave reeds into door wreaths with patterns that whisper river and field. Men carve simple patterns into chair rails between repairs. Chevrons, stars, initials cut where thumbs rest. None of it is necessary to live. All of it is necessary to keep living. The frontier doesn't throw parades. You make your own at the edges of function. Trade edits the room over time. A Delaware woman shows you birch bark stitching that doesn't leak, and the box becomes a larder you trust during August storms. In return, you teach her husband to tweak a draw-knife angle for cleaner shavings. Suspicion sits on the sill and watches, but utility has a way of voting with both hands. Later, mica sheets replace greased paper in the window. A deer hide becomes a curtain when winter pushes its face through the shutter cracks, and a length of iron from a far blacksmith becomes a shelf bracket you brag about like it's a cousin who won a war. Children carve their own architecture. A secret notch under a stool keeps a pebble prize. A row of chest-high pegs, their pegs, teaches order without shouting. A ladder notched into the loft beam holds boot prints like a family tree. At some point, a frog finds its way into a sister's tick and the night detonates. Discipline follows, and so does a story that gets told every time the tick is fluffed. Furniture becomes biography. All of it sits in a logic loop with weather. When north winds soar at the corners, the bed shifts leeward. When summer turns the cabin into an oven, the table slides near the door for draft. When illness crawls in, the pallet returns to the hearth and shelves empty their jars. Willow bark, sumac, mint. When danger presses its nose against the window, the doorbar finds a heavier slot. and the bench becomes a barricade. Form serves function, because function is the only law that pays out here. By the time the shelves stop sagging and the ropes hold tight, the cabin stops being a box and starts being a system. You can sit without scanning for splinters, reach without juggling, sleep without testing the floor for movement. But a house that serves you must also be served. Steel kept sharp, lashings tight, stocks rotated, leaks hunted and tried in the court of daylight. Furnishings don't end the work. They multiply its reach. Tomorrow the tools that built this comfort get promoted to guardians. Maintenance isn't a chore. It's the daily argument you make to keep the wilderness on the other side of the door. If you don't sharpen steel, winter will sharpen its teeth on you. Building a cabin is one battle. Keeping it standing is a campaign that never ends. The forest doesn't stop pressing just because you raised walls. Rain hunts for cracks. Frost pries logs apart, vermin test every corner, and your tools decay the second you lay them down. The frontier is a contest of upkeep, and the loser pays in hunger or fire. Sharpening isn't vanity, it's religion. Every dawn or dusk, a settler leaned over an axe with whetstone and water, drawing edge across grit until it whispered sharp again. A dull edge splinters wood, glances off, and bites flesh instead of bark. One man skipped his evening ritual and paid with 3 stitches from a slipped swing. From then on, the grindstone became the evening bell. The sound was reassurance, tools ready, house safe, winter postponed another day. Trouble comes from above as well as below. A cougar once padded onto the eaves of a Tennessee cabin, sniffing for chickens. The family banged blunt axe heads against rafters until the cat dropped snarling into the night. That lesson echoed. Keep your roof clear of overhang. Keep your rifle close when you climb for repairs, and never step onto shingles without checking the tree line. Maintenance isn't just wood and nails, it's vigilance. Tools themselves blur into survival. An axe isn't retired after felling. It trenches drainage ditches, splits trap stakes, shapes fence rails. Some frontiersmen baptized their blades in creek water, a ritual to keep them honest. What actually kept them honest was use. A tool ignored rusted. A tool swung daily shone. Hatchets doubled as surgeons too. Eliza Parker lopped the head from a copperhead with one strike when it coiled near her children. She smoked sage after, a ritual to scrub omens, but the cut itself was pure reflex, sharpened by years of keeping the edge right. Knives filled the smaller wars. They trimmed lashings, whittled plugs for leaks, cut patches of moss for chinking when cold air whistled through gaps. A dull knife isn't nuisance, it's betrayal. Men learned to sharpen by lamplight, a rhythm of stone and steel that hummed through cabins at night. One hunter swore his best kill wasn't from the rifle, but from a knife sharp enough to finish a deer clean and quiet, when powder was wet. Augurs, those spiral drills, were silent insurance. They bored holes for pegs, tapped new joints when beams split, and cut peepholes in shutters to watch the tree line. A small hole in the right place could save a house or a life. Many cabins carried augurs like charms, rarely used but never absent. The hearth, too, needed constant fear. Embers wandered, if not smothered. Settlers made a ritual of circling their fire before bed, kicking ash, setting stones back, whispering half prayers, half reminders. Smokehouses demanded the same. Salt kept meat honest, but sparks hid in ash and waited for the chance to climb walls. Whole stores vanished to a single ember ignored. A family that lost its winter meat to fire often lost itself to cold soon after. Firecraft was both misery and marvel. Flint sparked when it wanted, not when you begged. Some carried gunpowder shavings to catch quicker, but a single gust could turn that convenience into a scorched beard. One man in Kentucky never lived down the singed eyebrows that marked his impatience. Lesson: better to carry dry moss and patience than powder and scars. Roofs and walls never rested. Pitch sealed leaks until summer heat melted it loose. Tar patched holes but stank like rot. Clay stopped drips but cracked in frost. Maintenance was a rolling cycle. Climb, patch, descend, repeat. A cabin was never done. It was always holding. Families treated the creak of a beam or the drip of a seam as urgent as a cry from a child. Ignore either, and the cost came quick. By nightfall, a house that looked sturdy was just one storm away from failure. Only constant care kept it alive. Tools sharpened, cracks filled, fire tamed. This was the drumbeat of frontier life. You never stopped working, because the land never stopped trying to take back what you built. Inside, you could almost believe the war was won. But the ground beyond the door decided whether you ate, traded, or starved. Fields, food, and the watchful eyes of neighbors became the final line between survival and erasure. And that line was only as strong as the community you built to hold it. The ground beyond the door is where your luck is minted. You don't just clear brush, you negotiate with roots older than your surname. Start with the rule that saves backs and seasons. Don't fight every tree to the death. Girdle the ones too big to waste time on. Cut a ring through the living bark to starve the crown. They die standing. Sunlight leaks down and you get corn while ghosts of trunks still mark the lines you'll fell next year. Dig stumps where you must, not where your pride wants a clean square. Pride eats time. Time eats winter stores. Burn piles at night when air is still. Keep a wet branch for sparks. And place fires on bare soil unless you want roots to carry flame under your fence like a thief. Sod on the plains is not dirt. It's muscle. You slice it in slabs with a spade that bends your will more than its own. It stacks heavy, and your first furrow feels like dragging a boat over carpet. A steel share bites better, but most men start with a wooden plough nose shod with iron, pulled by a pair of oxen that don't care about your schedule. When the blade hits a buried rock, the yoke jerks, your hands blister, and your throat invents new scripture. You fix the share with a file, and promise yourself to walk the field before sunrise next time, marking stones with sticks like graves, so you can pry them out after chores, one enemy at a time. Planting is not romance, it's timing. Cold soil sulks its seed, hot soil rushes it, and frost keeps its own counsel. Corn is the frontier's banker, tall, storable, and forgiving if you treat it like a companion, not a miracle. Beans climb corn, squash sprawls in the shade, three sisters that hold the ground and share the work. Ignore the trio, and the wind will peel your soil into somebody else's county. Watch the moon if you want, but watch the weather more. A hard north breeze after a warm week is not a lesson. It's a test. Keep seed back as insurance. A man who plants every last kernel trusts the sky like a gambler, trusts a card sharp. Fences are lines you draw against hunger with wood and nerve. Split rails fit zigzag if nails are rare. Brush piled thick can keep a deer honest until it learns to float over like a ghost. People hang rags steeped in bear grease, string hair from their own heads, and tie bells that ring like a warning to themselves more than the animals. None of it is perfect. You walk the fence at dawn because leaving it for noon is an invitation. When a buck teaches your corn how to die in a night, you learn the real measure of stubbornness, repair, tighten, add height, and keep going while your stomach mutters names for venison. Hunting is an arithmetic of silence, distance and powder that clumps when you need it thin. The long rifle carries its own religion. Patch just right, seat the ball true, prime the pan sparingly. Dew turns good shots into apologies. A misfire in the face of an elk reminds you that meat has opinions. You keep your flint fresh, your touch hole clean, and your hands steady enough to finish clean. When the shot rings, the woods go quiet in a way that tells you you've earned the sound. You carry more home than meat, sinew for thread, hide for warmth, bone for tools. Waste is a rumor that gets men judged when they're too sparse to spare judgment. Traps hunt while you sleep, if you set them like someone who respects teeth. Snares for rabbits on trails the brush whispers about. Deadfalls baited with scraps. Steel for beaver, where water glints like a blade in brush. You check lines at first light because mercy matters, and because stolen fur attracts trouble with 2 legs or 4. A coyote in a snare is a lesson you don't repeat. You go in with a pole and a plan, or you bury a knife in a story you won't tell your children yet. Foraging is a syllabus you pass or pay. Blackberry canes trade blood for sugar. Hickory nuts rattle like small promises. Mushrooms punish cocky men. Pokeberries punish boys who think purple means sweet. You teach children to test with eyes, then with names, and finally with time. Boil sumac into a tart drink that keeps scurvy thin. Strip bark for willow's bitter that pulls fever's teeth. Dig wild onions where soil crumbles fragrant. Trade knowledge when you can. A neighbor's list of poisonous leaves is worth more than his spare nails. When someone hands you ginseng wrapped like a secret, you learn where it grew by listening to where they will not talk about. Preserving is the hinge between abundance and hunger. You slice meat thin while it's cool and your knife is clean. Hang it in smoke that crawls more than roars, and mind the fire like it's a child with a habit of wandering. Salt turns pork into currency. Barrels hoard it like a bank. Every grain costs, so you pack tight and seal tighter. Root cellars are earth lungs, cool, damp, breathing slow. You line them with stone, hang a lantern low, and keep shelves off the ground so rot can't climb. Mark sacks by hand. Rotate before decay writes your schedule in smell. When apples kept in sawdust turn to ant kingdoms, you learn to screen vents and sprinkle ash. And you swear you knew that already next time someone asks. Defense is not peacetime work. It's housekeeping. Loopholes in the walls stare like extra eyes. A doorbar is a beam that doesn't apologize. You practice with rifles like you practice knots. Load, trade, fire, reload. No one is a hero. Everyone is a link. Wolves read smoke like a map. Raiders read habit. You vary your trails to the spring. Keep a spare bucket under the floor and decide which window you'll give up to a shot, if the night says so. Arrows can find gaps. You close gaps. Bullets punch where boards whisper. You double boards where whispers are loudest. Most trouble sniffs and moves on when a shutter creaks open to show a muzzle that speaks both languages, warning and memory. Weather is the adversary that signs its work. Hail carves roofs. Wine tests joinery. Snow asks whether your pitch is math or vanity. You bank earth around the base before the north wind explains drafts to your ankles. You stash kindling where wet can't touch it, stash water where ice can't find it, and keep a long pole for knocking snow from the roof before weight remembers the laws you pretended not to hear. In summer, lightning becomes bored with far ridges and looks at your chimney like a dare. You clean the flue, you trim branches, and you lay a bucket by the door because speed wins arguments, fire starts.